Alright, in this video we're going to continue on with factoring out the GCF. However, now we're going to talk about if the leading coefficient is negative. So remember, when the leading coefficient, we mean by the leading, we mean the one with the highest degree. So this term has degree 3, this term has degree 5, and this term has degree 7. So this term here is the leading coefficient. The leading term, and then the coefficient here is negative. If the leading coefficient is negative, when we factor out the GCF, we also need to factor out that negative. So the reason for that will come later when we start solving these types of equations. So this whole thing could be set in an equation, and then it would be something we could solve. So when we're solving, we want to factor out the negative to make it easier for us to solve. So that's where we're headed with this. So let's go ahead and factor out the GCF, and this time we're going to take a negative. So looking at each term here, I want the GCF of the coefficients. In this case, we know we're taking out a negative because the leading term had a negative coefficient. I see what divides into 8, 20, and 16, and I know that 4 would go into all of them. So I'm going to take out a 4. And then I look at the variables, and the smallest variable is f cubed as the smallest degree, and so that's the most that I can take out, because I can't take out more than f cubed if that last term doesn't have more than f cubed. So there's my GCF. Now I go ahead and factor it out of each term. Oops, that was a 7. And the middle term, dividing out the GCF, not forgetting that negative. Alright, I divide it out of each one, and I see what's left. So negative divided by negative is going to end up positive. 8 divided by 4 is 2. I had f to the 7th here, divided by f cubed. That's going to leave me with f to the 4th, right? 7 minus 3. And then a positive divided by negative is going to end up negative. 20 divided by 4 is 5. F to the 5th divided by f cubed would be f squared, right? 5 minus 3. And then the last term, a negative divided by negative, is going to end up positive. And f cubed divided by f cubed is 1. 16 divided by 4 is 4. So again, this is not the final answer. This is what was left when I divided out the GCF. The factored form is the GCF times the result of when I divided it out. And it needs to be equivalent to what I started with. So I can always check myself by distributing, and it needs to be what I started with. Try the 2 on the right. Alright, I am looking to factor out the GCF. I notice that this has degree 5, this term has degree 3. The leading coefficient, so degree 5 here is the highest one, has a negative coefficient. So I'm going to remember to take out a negative with my GCF. So negative, and then I know 5 divides into both 5 and 10, so that's the greatest common factor of the coefficients. And d cubed, that is the smallest exponent that will divide into both. I divide that out of each term, divide by my GCF, divide by my GCF. Remember, we're undoing multiplication with that division. That gives me a negative 10 divided by negative 5 is positive 2. D to the 5th divided by d cubed is d squared, 5 minus 3. A negative 5 divided by negative 5 is positive 1. And I can see here that 5 divides out, d cubed divides out, and I'm only left with 1. Anything divided by itself is 1. So the factored form of this is my GCF times what was left when I divided that GCF out. And the next one here, same thing. I look at each term. I spot my leading term, which is the y cubed. It has the highest degree. That leading term has a negative coefficient, so I need to remember to take out a negative. And I look at my coefficients, 2, 7, 3. They actually don't have any common factors as far as anything other than 1. So I'm going to have to take out a negative 1, right? 2 is prime, 7 is prime, 3 is prime. They have nothing in common. I have to look at my variables as well. I notice a y cubed, a y, no y's. So I can't divide out a y if they don't all have a y. So my GCF here is only negative 1. So I have to divide that out of each term. It's just going to change the sign of everything, right? So it becomes a positive 2y cubed, positive 7y, and a negative 3. And my factored form would be negative 1 times that 2y cubed plus 7y minus 3. And there you go. So remember the steps for factoring out the GCF. We look at what's in common for all, both the coefficients and the variables. If the leading term is negative, we have to take out a negative. We undo that multiplication by dividing out the GCF, and then we write it in the factored form of the GCF times what was left when we divided out the GCF.